My name is Eva, I'm 26 years old, and since I was little I learned that in my family love was distributed unequally. I grew up under the weight of two unspoken, yet never explicitly stated, rules that dictated each one's value. First rule, Lily always comes first. Second rule, if anything was left perhaps I, Eva, could have a little. These rules marked my existence and determined what was allowed or denied, as if my very right to be loved depended on what remained after the princess of the house. Yet nothing compared to the upheaval that came that summer. The summer that would forever change the course of my life. On a gray morning with the timid light of dawn seeping through the curtains, my mother, Eleanor, called me into the living room. Her face showed a tension I had never seen before, and my father, Philip, stood by her side, arms crossed and with an expression that mixed worry and resignation. "Eva, we need to talk," she said in a tone that, though gentle, carried an unbearable weight. "Before we get back to the story, let us know where you're watching from, and if this story touches you, make sure to subscribe to the channel because I have something extra special for you tomorrow." I felt my heart race as I entered the room. The atmosphere, usually familiar and cozy, had transformed into a setting of uncertainty. "What happened?" I asked, trying to mask my nervousness, my voice trembling with anticipation. My mother sighed deeply, as if summoning the courage to deliver the devastating news. "It's about your grandfather." For a moment time seemed to freeze. My gaze fixed on her features, trying to decipher the anguish displayed there. "Grandfather? What happened?" I managed to murmur, barely believing that something so terrible could be happening. My father moved closer, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder, a gesture mixing tenderness with the inevitability of a painful truth. "He is in a coma, Eva." The words fell like a sentence. My grandfather, Irene, had always been my safe haven, the only figure who made me feel valued in an environment where I was treated as disposable. The floor seemed to collapse beneath my feet, and a wave of anguish invaded my being. Without thinking, I sprang to my feet. "I need to go to the hospital." Before I could insist, my mother grasped my hand firmly. "No, dear. The hospital has restrictions. We can only visit him in a week." Those words sounded like a cruel punishment. How could I accept waiting when the possibility of seeing my grandfather fighting for his life was so imminent? "But what if something worse happens?" I asked, my voice choked with fear and doubt. Philip merely nodded, confirming that waiting was the best option. In a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, I tried to cope with the feeling of powerlessness. The long-awaited trip to Hawaii, planned with so much enthusiasm, now seemed like a privilege amidst the pain. "Eva, think carefully. Do you really want to travel while your grandfather is like this?" My mother insisted, as if trying to protect me from a hasty decision. The decision seemed inevitable. Either forego the chance to be by the side of someone I loved or accept what appeared to be a sacrifice greater than I could bear. Thus, with a heart torn apart, I chose to stay. Yet even in that choice, something deeply unsettled me. In the following days, the anguish turned into an endless wait. Every phone call to the hospital, every attempt to obtain information, was met with the same monotonous "no change." I found myself trapped in a cycle of uncertainty and helplessness, while my parents' silence only deepened my doubt about the truth of that story. Then, as if fate wanted to deliver a final blow, the truth began to reveal itself in an unexpected way. During an afternoon of dejection while scrolling through social media to distract my mind, I came across an image that froze my blood. There was Lily, radiant with the paradisiacal backdrop of Hawaii. The captions and comments, full of praise, were a stark contrast to the tragedy that had been announced in my own life. The shock set in quickly. My heart, once torn apart by supposed anguish, now pounded with fury. How could it be possible that my sister, the always favored one, was enjoying a dream while I was deprived of contact with my grandfather? And most painfully, my parents were also in the photos, enjoying moments of relaxation and leisure, the very image that contradicted the narrative of suffering I had been told. Without hesitating, I grabbed my phone and, with trembling hands, dialed the hospital's number. The response was cold and direct, without any sign of empathy. "Miss, there is no patient by that name. We have no record of anyone named Irene being admitted." Those words cut through the hope I still clung to. My grandfather had never been in a coma. Every second of anguish, every tear shed, had been part of a meticulously orchestrated lie by my own parents. A farce to keep me away from the long-dreamed-of trip and perhaps, to keep me under their control. The revelation of the lie was devastating. I felt betrayal spread through every fiber of my being. It all boiled down to a cruel manipulation. While I suffered and despaired, they enjoyed paradise, happy and oblivious to my pain. Amid the anger and disgust, a spark of vengeance began to burn intensely within me. I would no longer be the passive victim of a story written by others. The lie that had imprisoned me would now become the fuel for my liberation. As the day waned and reality imposed itself, I realized that this betrayal was the last straw in a long history of neglect and devaluation. Every forgotten birthday party, every compliment reserved for Lily, every lost opportunity, all of it accumulated into an unbearable burden, yet also into a fierce determination to change my destiny. With a heavy heart and tear-filled eyes, I faced the harsh truth. I was the outcast, the second option, and I would no longer accept being treated as such. From that moment on, I decided that the truth, however painful, would be my weapon to reclaim my identity. I would no longer be the invisible one content with crumbs of love and attention. And so, the first chapter of a journey promising to be the turning point in a life marked by pain closed. The summer, which should have been a time of hope and renewal, had become the setting for my internal revolution. The lie my parents told would no longer imprison me. On the contrary, it would be the seed of a vengeance and a transformation I had never imagined. The revelation of the farce became the spark for an internal transformation. Still dazed and with my heart beating out of rhythm, I decided to seek answers that could confirm the magnitude of the betrayal. Every step was a mixture of despair and determination. I needed to understand how my parents, people who had always been cloaked in familial protection, could have orchestrated such a cruel lie. After the first confirmation over the phone, I returned to the hospital to try to speak with someone in charge. However, the cold routine of the service allowed no room for explanations. The indifference of the attendants only reinforced the reality that what I had been told was a sham. The truth began to form in my mind like a mosaic of traumas accumulated over the years. Every forgotten birthday, every misdirected compliment now gained new meaning. I, who had always been relegated to the role of second choice, saw my story being retold in the form of disdain. Determined to confront this past that had deprived me of my identity, I went to my grandfather's house. Upon arriving, I was greeted by the comforting aroma of fresh coffee and aged wood, a refuge from the lies that haunted me. When the door opened, my grandfather's tender gaze enveloped me, though it also carried a silent sadness. "Eva, my dear, I'm so sorry you're going through this," he said, his voice choked with emotion. I sat beside him and with tear-filled eyes asked, "Grandfather, why did they tell that lie? Why has my life always been treated as if I didn't matter?" He took a deep breath, as if each word carried the weight of years of silence and pain. "My dear, your parents have always been obsessed with the idea that perfection is measured by the attention given to one person, Lily. Since the day she was born, what was yours was overshadowed, and you, my beloved, were left in the background." As I listened to his words, memories of forgotten parties and moments of exclusion flooded my mind. The revelation was not just about a grandfather supposedly in a coma, but about years of neglect and disdain. I had built a life away from that imposed ideal, fighting every obstacle, yet always feeling the void left by the lack of recognition. That night, as I returned to my room, I decided that the truth would not only be an internal revelation but a weapon to reverse the power my parents held. I began researching, poring over documents, records, and every financial detail that could prove the extent of the manipulation. What I found was astonishing. First-class tickets, reservations at luxury resorts, exclusive excursions, all financed with resources that secretly also belonged to me. Every number, every statement became a piece of a macabre puzzle, showing how for years I was deprived not only of affection but also of my rights. The farce of my grandfather's hospitalization, told as an excuse to keep me away, was the ultimate expression of a cruel favoritism. At the same time, that same money, which had never been acknowledged as part of my history, shone as irrefutable proof of the injustice committed. With the digital dossier assembled and every detail recorded, the decision was made. It wasn't enough to feel the pain, I had to act. I would no longer be the victim of a family system that treated me as nothing more than an accessory. The truth, now consolidated in indisputable evidence, would be my weapon to rewrite the story. As the night advanced, determination grew ever stronger in my heart. I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation, knowing that by exposing this sham, the facade built over the years would crumble completely. Every document, every financial record was a silent message that I was finally reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The silence of my room was broken by the click of a keyboard, and the dossier took shape. Every digital file not only contained proof of the lie but also the silent screams of a child who had always felt invisible. In that early morning while the world slept, I wrote the prelude to a personal revolution. A manifesto against the favoritism, neglect, and lovelessness that had imprisoned me for so many years. The truth then would not just be revealed. It would be exposed to the world in all its cruelty. I was ready to transform the accumulated pain into strength and justice. And as dawn broke with the dossier in hand and my heart pounding with determination, I knew I was one step away from changing everything. With the digital dossier prepared, the next step was to unleash the truth to the world. The following morning as the sun timidly rose, I sat before my computer with a racing heart. Every click was an act of courage. Every word typed, a cry of freedom. The desire to expose the farce that had kept me imprisoned consumed me, and I knew there was no turning back. With a mixture of nervousness and determination, I posted the dossier on all my social media accounts. The evidence of the lie, the bank statements, the transactions, the photos of Lily enjoying Hawaii, was released in one fell swoop. The impact was immediate. Comments, messages, and shares poured in like an avalanche of support and indignation. "I can't believe your parents did this. What an injustice, the truth has finally come to light. You deserve all the recognition, Eva." Every notification served as a reminder that truth, no matter how painful, could not be hidden. As I read the reactions, I felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. The pain accumulated over the years was transforming into an energy capable of breaking down the barriers that had kept me in the shadows. The virtual uproar soon reflected in my family's interactions. That same afternoon when my parents returned from their trip, the atmosphere at home was irreversibly altered. As I entered the living room, my eyes met those of my mother, Eleanor, trembling with nervousness and disbelief. "Eva, what have you done?" she asked, her voice wavering between despair and anger. Without hesitation, I maintained a steady gaze and responded with the cold resolve of someone who had long awaited this moment. "You always told me that what was mine didn't matter. Today the truth can no longer be hidden." The explosion of emotions was instantaneous. Lily, unable to hide her panic and shame, hurled bitter words, while my father tried in vain to salvage a remnant of dignity. "Eva, please let's talk," he pleaded, but my determination turned every plea into a distant echo. The carefully staged family scene crumbled before my eyes. Every comment on social media, every testimonial of support, reinforced that my exposure was not just personal revenge, but a cry for justice against years of favoritism and neglect. "Today you will feel the weight of being discarded," I declared, my words echoing like an inescapable ultimatum. Chaos quickly spread. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers rallied behind my story, while the reputations of my parents and Lily disintegrated under the scrutinizing gaze of the internet. The truth, unveiled without pretense, turned the paradise of Hawaii into a symbol of family hypocrisy, a reminder that behind the glitter of a vacation lay a lie of unimaginable proportions. My phone kept buzzing. Every notification, every message of support, was proof that truth, however bitter, was liberating. The exposure I had triggered marked a turning point. And as I saw the perplexed and frightened expressions on my parents' faces, I knew I had finally claimed my space. As the confrontation escalated, I realized that the dossier was not just a collection of evidence but the embodiment of the silenced screams of an entire lifetime. Every bank statement, every transaction, every photo, each became a crucial piece in reconstructing the narrative that had always denied me love and recognition. The family environment transformed into a stage for forced confessions. Eleanor tried, her voice choked, to justify the lies as acts of protection, while Lily became lost in denials and accusations, unable to face her own fragility. My father, who had once been the pillar of authority, now appeared helpless, staring into the abyss of the consequences of his actions. That moment of chaos and exposure represented the liberation from years of suffering. I was no longer the silent victim. I was the protagonist of a story that, painful as it was transforming into a powerful claim for autonomy and justice. The cry of truth resounded, and at that instant, every tear and every word of accumulated contempt turned into strength. As the day turned into dusk, the feeling of victory mingled with the realization that there was no turning back. The truth, laid bare without embellishment, had taken control. I had claimed my space, and now the world knew what it meant to be truly ignored. Every comment of support, every share, confirmed that I was not alone. With the exposure of the truth, the very foundations of our family began to crumble irreversibly. What had once been a scene of meticulously constructed appearances transformed into chaos where hypocrisy and favoritism could no longer be concealed. Eva was finally taking control of my own story, and checkmate was imminent. In the days following the social media explosion, the consequences were devastating. Eleanor, who had always prided herself on maintaining the impeccable image of the perfect mother, saw her reputation shredded. Friends and acquaintances began to distance themselves, and isolation set in. One morning I received a phone call from her, her voice choked with remorse. "Eva, I lost my job," she confessed, each word laden with guilt and despair. "What a pity, Mom," I replied coldly, knowing that this was only the beginning of the end for everything she had known. Meanwhile, Lily, who had always been trattata como a favorita, saw her career and public image collapse. Her once loyal followers became merciless critics, and the brands that sponsored her cancelled contracts amid a wave of outrage. In one last desperate attempt, she accused me. "You destroyed everything, Eva. You ruined forever the image I had of myself." Without offering any further explanation, I replied with the coldness of someone who had long planned this moment. "Lily, you destroyed your own life. Now you know what it's like to be ignored." It wasn't long before my father, Philip, had to face the consequences of his actions. In a tense confrontation, he knocked on my door, his eyes full of regret and anguish. Clutched in his hands were the bank statements proving the diversion of family resources, money that I was now secretly reclaiming after years of exclusion. "Eva, please return what is ours," he pleaded, his voice heavy with defeat. But with the determination forged by years of devaluation, I answered. "Family? After everything you've done to me, you have lost the right to command me. Every cent that is now mine is proof that I will no longer be ignored." In that moment, checkmate was complete. With every word, every gesture, I reaffirmed that I would no longer submit to the dictates of a system that had always treated me as disposable. I closed the door in my father's face, and with a hardened heart, I felt that freedom was finally mine. The days that followed brought an inevitable transformation. Eleanor became a shadow of her former self, isolated and unsupported. Lily saw her life crumble, facing public contempt and the ruin of an image painstakingly built. And Philip, the man who had always been the authority in our home, watched his world collapse into a whirlwind of regret and loss. Amid all this ruin, I felt a bittersweet sense of victory. The truth, exposed without mercy, had freed not only my voice but also my soul. I was no longer the victim who settled for crumbs of affection. I was the protagonist of my own story, and every scar became a symbol of resistance. In that final moment, I sent one last message that sealed my fate. "You erased me from the family. Now I am erasing you from my life." Every word carried the determination of someone who had suffered in silence for years and was now rising with the strength of an undeniable truth. I had transformed pain into freedom, exclusion into justice. And as the last echoes of the lies dissipated, I moved forward, free to rewrite my story, unbound by a past that would never again define me. That checkmate was not just the end of a story marked by betrayal and favoritism, it was the beginning of a new era. Eva finally understood that true power lies in accepting one's own truth, in turning the wounds of the past into instruments of change. And so, with a light heart and eyes fixed on an uncertain yet free future, I left behind the ghosts that had always tried to define me. What did you think of this story of revenge and justice? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments and tell me which moment was your favorite. Would you have done something differently? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and don't miss any of our stories full of twists and impactful endings.